I'm Roger Reed, Mayor of Fredericktown. It has been a real privilege for me to help put this video of the history of the early Fredericktown together for your enjoyment. The individuals you will see in this video are just some of the people who have helped make Fredericktown the great community that it is. You will be seeing pictures that come from private collections in this video, which we believe you will find most interesting. I have thoroughly enjoyed working with everyone involved in making this video and would like to take this time to thank them for helping make this possible. I will be introducing our first two guests, and then I will turn it over to our moderator, Ray Davis. Before I do that, I would like to tell you how this video came about. About 3 months ago, a man by the name of David Carter, better known as Jake, approached me and said, "I think we need to preserve some of the history of Fredericktown." I could not have agreed with him more, and I said, "What can I do to help?" And this is how this video came into being. The man I'm about to introduce made all of this possible by donating his time, his equipment, and his expertise. It is my privilege to introduce to you your friend and mine, Jake Carter.
Thank you, Roger. The Fredericktown community, the early years. That's what this videotape's all about. I've wanted for a long time to capture some of the early history of the Fredericktown community, meaning Fredericktown, Waterford, Batemantown, Agneetown, Green Valley, the whole surrounding area. I spent about 33 and a half years in banking here in Knox County. I started out at the old Dan Struble and Son Bank that you see in the background in 1953. That building was later torn down in about 1968 and replaced with a new modern banking facility. The Dan Struble Bank was purchased by the First Knox National of Mount Vernon in about 1957, I believe. And I was with First Knox National then as vice president up until I took early retirement in 1987. During those years, I've heard a lot of good history from the Fredericktown and surrounding areas, and I thought it should be passed on to the future generations. We've assembled here today a group of people that have grown up in the Fredericktown area, were born and raised here for the most part, and we're former business people that have experienced some of this history. They're going to be talking with us and showing us, sharing a lot of their own photographs that they've collected over the years of early Fredericktown. I have a special interest in this history because my mother was born in the Waterford area. About 1904, she was one of the many Ackermans in the Waterford, Fredericktown area, and she's passed on a lot of stories that I found was very interesting. Roger Reed is going to be starting off the program today, interviewing Merle Grant and Eddie Toms. Then Ray Davis will be taking over. I'm going to enjoy this very much, and I hope that you will too.
At this time, we're going to Merle Grant's home. Merle's been a lifelong resident of the Fredericktown, Agneetown area. Merle's also an excellent leather craftsman. So at this time, it's all yours, Merle.
I'm fond of old guns, especially muzzle loaders. Well, there was a man in the Agneetown community by the name of Dan Humphrey who manufactured one at a time. There was no mass production deal, but he made muzzle-loading rifles on Greg Road, what is now Greg Road, halfway between Palmyra and Agneetown. Now, back in that day, Dan Humphrey got his freight at Palmyra off the stage. He got his mail in Agneetown. I've got a couple of those rifles, and there's 4 or 5 of them around the community. One day I went to the High State Museum to investigate, and I found that Dan Humphrey, gunmaker, was listed at Palmyra in New York. Well, I set them straight on that. And doing a little research around town, Mr. Orland Workman told me that some of his ancestors were still living, or his relatives were still living in Belleville. And I went up there and inquired around, and I found that there were two grandsons of Dan Humphrey living there, and one in Mansfield. And I approached this one, Charles, and he said, yes, he understood that Granddad made guns, but he said, I've never seen one. So I come back to town, I get Ralph Huff's gun and my couple, take them up, show them to him, and the old man fondled them, and tears rolled down his cheeks. He was so glad to see them. He told me at that time where Dan Humphrey was buried. He told me if I'd stand on the front steps up there at the church at Fredericktown and look straight east, I could see his tombstone, and he described a couple tombstones close by. And I went up there, and sure enough, there it was. And I found out on that stone that as renowned as Dan Humphrey was with his gun making, the man started his apprenticeship when he was 13 years old under a man by the name of Stahl down at Monroe Mills. And the man died when he was 45 years old. Information on the tombstone. But I used to hunt rabbits around the old shop up there on Greg Road, and didn't know until later years that that's where the shop was. And Mr. Cy Blackburn here in town had the rifling machine that Dan Humphrey used to rifle those barrels. Well, so much for Dan Humphrey. Another gun maker in this town was J.B. Blackburn. He made guns here, and his son, Mose Blackburn, followed him, and Mose was followed by his son, Ed Blackburn, and Ed was followed by his son, Cy Blackburn. So that's about the gun maker here in town. There might have been others, but this is all I have any dope on. But speaking of Mose Blackburn, now I'm going into another story. It's not related to guns. He had the first movie house here in town, across from Scarborough's Hardware. You can see on the building there, Blackburn Building. It's there now. But this was in silent movie days, when movies just came out, and most of the movies at that time were religious movies. There's a famous play called Omer Abagah that takes place in Germany, originated in Germany. It's reenacted at Spearfish, South Dakota every summer. But he was showing it on silent reel up here, and he wasn't getting much patronage. Not much attendance this particular night, and he was out on the street barking to get people to come in. He had his hands up to his mouth shouting, "Come in and see the movie. It's the only time that Jesus Christ will ever be in Fredericktown."
Now this building's, Merle, it's still there?
Oh, yeah.
It's the one straight across from Scarborough's. Is it the dance studio?
No, I think it's the one where the beauty shop is.
Okay, so it'd be the building in between the dance studio and where Paul Cochran's appliance was, in that area.
That would be my guess.
Okay.
because it's right above that. That stone's in the wall up there.
Okay.
Saying the Blackburn building. Now all of this that I'm giving you on the Blackburns is authority of Foy Herendeen. I didn't experience these things, but I do remember the stories told by some of the old timers here in town.
Well, there's one thing that I want to ask. I know, and you probably won't bring it up, but I think it's worth telling the folks about. I think everybody knows that you are a real craftsman, and I know for a fact that you've made some bridles and harnesses for the Budweiser team. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Because I doubt if you was going to bring that up.
No, I wasn't going to mention that, but I had made some halters for a firm in Cincinnati and made delivery on them at the annual draft horse sale at the state fairgrounds. And Mr. Harlan Conley, who was in charge of Clydesdales at Anheuser-Busch, he was there and saw those halters and asked me to make some halters for them. And I did, and I made those halters, several orders for a period of 12 years, until they started the horse park down in Kentucky, and Mr. Conley went down there to manage that, and they got a new man out of St. Louis, and he had his own harness maker. But I did make, I'm proud to say, I did make halters for Anheuser-Busch.
Well, that says a lot for your craftsmanship. That was a real accomplishment. Okay, Merle, what else do you have to share with us?
Well, where I live here, if this place was about 50 to 75 feet higher, we would be on top of Ghost Hill, but now we're in Ghost Hill. Ghost Hill was a cow pasture. This was owned by a Linden man who lived out here where Ward Craft is now. And I went by here a lot of times. And you'd have to look up, driving by the road, you'd have to look up to see the top of it. Now Ed and Tom can tell you a lot of stories about Jim and Tom Purdy and a lot of the kids around here slid downhill here. But now, it's at the height that it is now because Bob Mielek and Knox County and a lot of the road builders, contractors, hauled the most of Ghost Hill away.
What was the reason for that?
Graveling road.
No.
But way back before my time, not too far before my time, there was an organization very active in this location called the Ku Klux Klan. And they burned their fiery crosses on top of this hill, and that's where Ghost Hill comes in. If you ever saw a Ku Klux Klan uniform, I know you had one on TV, but they looked like ghosts, you know. So that's where it got its name, Ghost Hill. Another thing that I believe interesting, out Nishi Road, which is County Highway 55, off of Route 95, is Bassett Cemetery, about a quarter of a mile from the corner up there. And you'll find, by just driving along the road and looking over in there, you'll find 5 sandstone markers shaped like inverted arrowheads. There's 2 small ones, and there are Indians buried there, which is interesting to a lot of people.
Exactly now, where is this?
I don't know the people's names who live out there anymore, but where the abrupt turn is in 95, where you start north,
Uh-huh.
don't go north to Town, go straight on across.
Okay.
About a quarter of a mile is a little cemetery
Okay.
on the right. Now on the subject of cemeteries, go on north through Town to Gregg Road, turn to the left, go about a quarter of a mile, and there's another cemetery. And this organization here in town that did research on family cemeteries here some time ago has that recorded as Ridenour Cemetery. Now this is because Dan Ridenour's property bordered it on the south and on the west, but that was known as the Ireland Cemetery. How do I know? Because our 4-H club would get the contract every year from the township trustees to clean up those cemeteries and mow the grass and clean the fence rows and everything. And now John Ackerman was on that committee that was researching those old cemeteries, and I've told him about it. But since that time, they have erected a nice sign up there that says Ridenour Cemetery.
Now, Merle, when you're going north from Town and you go up to Gregg Road, you turn left.
Right.
Then which side of the road is the cemetery on?
On the left.
On the left side. About how far?
About a quarter of a mile. Yeah, it's right at the crest of the hill before you start down that hill there. And that is Ireland Cemetery. And while I'm on the subject of Ireland, across from the church in Palmyra, where Harley Swihart lived for years, was the home of the Irelands. Sis Ireland. She was a maiden lady, and she had a lot of suitors. Now what I'm telling you now was told to me by Herb B. Hiller and by Howard Gregg. Several times I've heard Howard tell it. But this Sis Ireland had a lot of suitors, and this was back in the days of horse and buggy and before electricity. And I can remember the hitching rails along the south side of the church up there. But this one suitor came with his horse and buggy and picked her up, drove around the church, and he had a pretty nice white horse, and he tied it up to the hitching rail, took the robe out of the buggy and covered his horse, and helped her out, and they went into the church. And while they were gone, some boys knew of a dead white horse in the community. They unhitched his horse and propped this white one up with fence rails and threw the same blanket over. And when the doings was over and they come out, he helped her in the buggy. Got in himself, took hold of the lines and went to back up, and the horse fell over. That's the end of it. That comes from good authority.
Do you think he made a real impression on her?
One way or another.
Yeah, one way or another. Now, coming into town, there's a section down here bordered by Salem Avenue and Tuttle. No population in this end of town at all, but I had an uncle by the name of Ari Grant. He lived where John Moore lived, out on 66. He farmed this down here, and that's where it got its name, Fredericktown. He raised potatoes down there, and that's where Grand Street gets its name, just bordered that.
Merle, going back to this Tater Town, exactly where In what area? Is it Grant Street? Is it Taylor Street? Is it Zen Avenue? Exactly what location was?
Now that I can't tell, but Grant Street was in there, and the Tuttle goes along the foundry there.
Yes.
Yeah. Dick Workman, or Cochran's house, Cochran lives there now. Those houses weren't in there at all.
Okay.
And during that time in off season, they would have circus. That was the show place here in town for them to set up tents and have circuses and shows. Going down the upper Fredericktown Road, just as you leave town, they've got a lake there now. They've moved that gravel all out.
Mm-hmm.
But just very recently, they tore down the old red barn that sat right there, if you remember that. Mm-hmm. And there was a pitcher pump out close to the road. My grandparents used to live there years ago. Well, looking west from that property, in a straight line, you could see the mound down here. And that mound had no vegetation on it at all at that time. Between where my grandparents lived and that mound, near the railroad track, was Cooper's racetrack. They raced horses there. Now this is authority of Lewis Hyatt.
This mound that you're referring to is the one right on South Main as you drop over the hill to where Gilmore's auction barn is now,
yeah,
right?
It's a big mound up there on the right. Called Raleigh's Mound, or it was in my day, called Raleigh's Mound. So I don't believe there was many people that knew that. Now another very interesting and amusing thing, I wished I knew the names of the people that live in these homes, but if you would go up Roberts Road, just a short distance, Bill Moody's farm's on the left. And the next farm, Carl Darling lived there, but who lives there now, I don't know. But that house used to sit on top of the hill up back of there. Tennyson Swank lived there. He moved it down to the road. Now most of this land from the Moody, and maybe including the Moody farm, on north, quite a ways, up to about Forrest Kinney's place, was all owned by the Foots. Some part of the family of Foots. Well, this house on top of the hill that Tennyson Swank moved down close to the road was Tilly Foots' home place. She was raised there. When Tennyson moved it down, it offended her. She goes up the road and built a house just like it on top of the hill, which is now Nether's garage. Nether. She built that house so she'd have a house on top of the hill. Now this, I say respectfully, she was the homeliest woman I ever saw. Maybe I shouldn't add this, but us boys would avoid her. She walked every place she wanted to go. And we would avoid her. We'd climb the fences and go over in the fields to get around her. And I suppose today I think she was harmless. But she had her characteristics, and that was one of them. She built that house up there that Nethers lives in. Middlebury Township, Berlin Township, Morris and Wayne used to all be Wayne Township. Great big township. Why was it called Wayne Township? Because General Matt Anthony Wayne, who whipped the Indians at the Battle of Fallen Timbers up close to Toledo today, and made them come to terms in 1795 at his office at Fort Greenville, which is Greenville, Ohio today. They arrived at a boundary line that those Indians should stay north of and the white people south. And I'll take the time to tell you that boundary line started down in Indiana on the Ohio River at a little town now named as Lamb, L-A-M-B. Lamb is across the Ohio River from the mouth of the Kentucky River that flows north out of Kentucky. That line runs east of north, mostly north, and crosses the Ohio line just north of Union City, Ohio, and Union City, Indiana. Runs right straight into the town of Fort Recovery. It turns at Fort Recovery and comes south and east down to Fort Laramie in Shelby County. It turns there and goes east, south of east across the country. And it's what Yankee Street is up here today. That's part of the Greenville Treaty Line. And I've been told by pilots that if you fly over the state, you could tell that this line had some significance. It was either roadways or fence roads most of the way across the state. It went right through our farm up here at Fredericktown, and that's why I was so interested. And then I worked for 7 years over in Darke County, and they had the 150th anniversary of the signing of that treaty, and I attended that there in Greenville, and I learned a lot about it. And as you go in the state capitol today, there's a big, large mural on the wall in there, the signing of the Greenville Treaty by Howard Chandler Christie. He was the artist who was contracted with to do that painting. This township was split up because of an increase in population. And one of the instigators of this was a man by the name of Luther Bateman. Luther Bateman was the instigator of the little burg up there being named after him, Batemantown, and the township being named Middlebury Township. You'd never guess why. I'm going to tell you why. Luther Bateman was born in Middlebury, Vermont. Now, a sidelight on that, that was the hometown of John Deere of implement fame, Middlebury, Vermont. There used to be 2 stockyards in this town. I remember both of them. I helped unload the hogs. It wasn't very big. One of them was right down there where that scale house is that Tom Updike used to use. Kind of a coal yard there. That was operated by Homer Lavery. Well, you went over the railroad tracks and down along the tracks there was another stockyard, and that was operated by a man who lived on the corner here.
Ed Moore?
Ed Moore and one other fellow. Maybe I'll think of it. But a lot of people don't know that there was a stockyard in Ankneytown. And it was located up on the bank on the north side of the railroad, on the west side, on the east side of the highway. And when they loaded livestock, they loaded them down a chute into the car instead of up a chute. That stockyard was up on the bank. They shoved them down the chute. Now between that stockyards and the road, we're talking about the east side of the road. There was a building there that was the first elevator in Ankneytown. In later years, that building was moved across the road, and it is the first house on the left after you cross the railroad and go into town. Right there on the left. Bob Doberstein lived there for years and years. Before that, Matty Thompson lived there.
What year would that have been, Merle, that stockyard was used there?
Well, 23, 24, 25 was about the last. Maybe 23 would be the last.
So was the elevator the one that just burnt not too many years ago? Is that the start of the elevator there?
No. When that one was moved over and used as a dwelling, then they built the new one. Now that new one had to be built in the early 20s, and my stepfather helped build that. And I've got his picture here with the crew up on there building it. Now, the depot there in Town set out real close to the road. When you came up from the south and stopped for the railroad, you could almost reach out and touch that depot. But Amos Richardson was the agent there, and I've got some paraphernalia here from that depot. But before the days of walkie-talkie, they had these hoops they held up with a spring on them. I ought to have one here to show you. It's hanging over there. He had his orders in proper stationery, and he'd put it in this clip and stand out on the platform, and the train would come by. The ones going west, the fireman would reach out with his arm, and he'd hook that, jerk the orders out, and throw it back on the platform. As the train was going the other way, the engineer, he would catch it. But a lot of times they wouldn't get them thrown back on the platform. So when we would go down there to get coal or take wheat down or feed ground or something like that, us kids would always run over there in the weeds along the track, see if we could find any of those hoops. And we did a lot of times, and take them up and give them to Amos, and he would take us in the waiting room of that depot, and in the corner was a little Chiclets gun machine. He'd put a penny in there, and he'd get us each a box of those little Chiclets. So that's my memories of it. Well, I've got a lot of memories of Amos Richardson. He was a nice man, and I wish I could say the same about his wife. She had stories connected with her. And poor old Amos stood on the platform and watched her get killed right there on that crossing in her new Oldsmobile, automobile. It was a sad time. I went to school with both of their daughters, Ione and Louise. Floyd told me about skipping Sunday school, him and some other boys, to come out there at the square. I guess this had been advertised or they heard it somewhere. But the 20 mule team of Boric's fame was coming through town. And Foy told me in detail how those mules came up there, made a right-hand turn, headed west. They'd step over the traces until the next team got up. They'd step back in the traces. This team would do the same until they got it all on. They'd do it without even command. Of course, they had to be trained sometime, but all this was done, and Foy told it in detail. Jake used to live in the old Kerr property up there. Before that, it was Lloyd Kushner. If you go down around on the Mansfield Road, what's now the Mansfield Road, turn to up over the hill. Do you know the name of that hill?
No. It's just on the way to the old Harris farms, the only thing I know.
Well, that's Kiefer Hill. And back in that day, those landmarks was referred to often, more so than the state routes were talked about.
Such as Smith's Curve and
That's right. And McNutt's Corners.
McNutt's Corners. I've heard that.
Jackson's Bridge,
Pardon?
Jackson's Bridge, and
Jackson's Bridge. Harwood Hill, coming up out of Angrytown, that was Harwood Hill. Going up 13 to Belleville, we had Seitz's Hill, and the hill this side was Allgaier Hill. A lot of them. But getting back to this Harris place, John Harris lived in a nucleus up there of Johns. There was John Rummel, John Love, John Harris, John Spawn, John Gilmore, and John Parrish. Their farms all were adjacent. You ever hear that?
Never heard that.
1927, I, my oldest brother Willard, lived with our father. Our parents had separated. We had no telephone, no phonograph, no radio. And we lived in that house, the first house north of Rabbitfoot Schoolhouse. But Lindbergh was crossing the ocean, and I'd go out and sit by the mailbox until the mail came. I wanted to see if Lindbergh got across the ocean all right. This is 1927. Another thing that I remember that year was Harry Swank got killed here in town. And another thing, up on land owned by, I think, Bob Gregg today, the old Wagner place up Salem Road beyond Salem Church. Wagners lived there. Blake Wagner's home, and Kenneth and Howard and Lyle, Teresa, Laura, and Colleen. And up above where we lived on near Rabbitfoot Schoolhouse, there had been a family of Chandlers lived there, and one of them runs that tire shop in Mount Vernon today. But these boys and the Wagner boys were all buddies, and they'd come up on the first day of hunting season to go hunting. Well, they came in the evening and finished their hunt, and all the Wagners, the young boys and girls and all, came running out to see what kind of success they'd had. And Teresa, Snick Holflick's wife, was 16 years old. She was one of the Wagner girls, standing there with the other. And one of these Chandler boys was emptying his gun, but pumping it out. And one shell lit on a stone and exploded, and it filled Teresa with shot all through this area. And old Doc Eastman here in town said he spent the rest of the night cutting BBs out of her. Okay, a lot of people don't know that the Lincoln burial train went through Fredericktown. From the nation's capital, it went by B&O to the state capital, and he was in state there for a while. And a lot of the people, including Cliff Klein, fixed little stick pins crossed like this, fixed them on the railroad tracks, and that train ran over them and mashed them and made little pairs of scissors out of them. That's just a side thing. At one time, there was 2 tanneries that operated in this town. And if I'm not mistaken, they were both operated by Strubels. Not the same Strubel, there's different families of Strubels. And one of those tanneries was located right in front of, it was on College Street, where Ralph Huff lives. That tannery was right in what is now College Street. And the other one, you went down College Street, took a footbridge across the railroad and went down, and it was down in there, the other side of the railroad. lot of people don't know that Dr. Ackerman only had one eye. Well, this was on a Halloween night, and he had a call, and he hitched up his rig and went out down what's now Route 13, but it was the old road at this time. That first set of buildings beyond the lane that goes back to the gravel works. Doug Todd owns it now, but that used to be Charlie Ayers' place. The old biplanes would come in and rent space across the road there and take up passengers. But some pranksters filled the road there with fodder out of Charlie Ayers' field that Halloween night. And Dot went down there with his rig, and he had to move it to get through to this patient. And Charlie shot at him. He had enough of that prank. The BB hit Doc in the eye, and that was that story. Yeah, I've got this picture here in my hand that shows Bill Leedy at the depot. Now, Bill was a farmer, but he went to Fredericktown and built a store just north of the old elevator that burned down, and built a house there. But didn't live there long. He went up on the hill and built the big house where Kushners lived in later years, and some other people. But he also built a grocery store up there. Now, there was a grocery store under the Grange Hall on the corner that burned down back in the 30s. But the owners and operators of that grocery store, their name was Rule. Now, there's a house between the two stores where these Rules lived. They had a daughter by the name of Sylvia Rule. Bill Leedy had a daughter by the name of Florence Leedy, later Florence Marble. Florence Leedy told me that she and that Rule girl were inseparable. Every bit of the daylight hours, those two girls were together. Now, this one picture shows his store here, and in the store is Sylvia Rule and Florence Leedy Marble, and standing beside Florence is Joe Kokenauer. That's all I can add to the Bill Leedy story. I can add that the main street in Fredericktown was called Contrary Street. I have a postcard with that information on it. The train wreck happened in 1937, just west of the crossing. And I believe that there was 14 cars that were upset in that. And Ed Tom's dad was a coal dealer here in town, and he got the contract to haul that, and Ed got the job of hauling most of that coal back to Fredericktown. Ed can tell you more about that. Well, Dave, I'm getting down to the end of the line here.
Well, Merle, we certainly appreciate all your interesting stories. We thank you for taking the time to share with us.
Well, I'm glad to do it. These things need to be recorded.
It's my privilege to introduce Eddie Toms. He's been a lifelong resident of Fredericktown and a merchant of the late 40s and the early 50s. And he did own and operate the bowling alley here in Fredericktown for several years. At this time, we're going to let Ed tell you what he can remember from the early parts of the 50s and whatever else he has to tell us. Ed?
Well, I'm going to start in with the foundry out here, the Foot Foundry. My dad was foreman out there of the molding room for 30-some years. And I spent a lot of time out there. I worked there extra, and he and I had a trucking business together, and we hauled a lot of stuff for the foundry. And we also hauled freight and express for the B&O Railroad at the same time, and I hauled coal also. Filled everybody's basements with coal in the summertime. That's when they used to burn a lot of coal.
Now, what years would that have been, Ed?
That was in 36, 37, 38, 39, and 40. And let's see. I used to do a lot of trucking for the foundry, and I was always around there. And there, at that time, bells for churches and different places were one of their main items of business, you know. And they also made cement mixers, and they had sidelines of different castings. And they also bought out the Black Furnace Company in Mount Vernon, and they made the black furnace for a long time. Also, a lot of people don't know this, but they made miniature golf courses. And they installed one in the front of the foundry, and every Saturday night, about every night, that place would just run over with people playing golf, miniature golf. They also made these to sell, and they would, after they would get them made, they would take one like to Cleveland and Sandusky and different cities, and they would send somebody from Fredericktown to run it until they got it sold, and they would sell them that way. That was really interesting.
Okay, so where they would set that up, would that be right about where the parking lot is for the main office there at the foundry now?
Yes, it was right in there. There was also an office there, but the one building wasn't there. That's where it was, right there in the front. But a lot of people don't remember that, but it was a great thing for Fredericktown. Then another thing, Mr. Zig owned the foundry. He also owned the Sunglow Furniture Factory. It was not called Sunglow, I don't think, at that time, but they started out making wash machines and different things, and they finally got down to making furniture. So he would go out and buy farms and cut the timber off, and haul the timber into Fredericktown, and they had a big sawmill across the creek from the depot. And that's where they had all these piles of lumber, and just beyond this lumber pile, we had a wonderful swimming pool in the creek. Mr. Zig financed the whole thing. He had a men's bathing house, a girls' bathing house. We had a 30-foot water slide into the creek. We had a 15-foot slide, and he also made playground equipment at Sunglow, and he equipped the whole place with what do you call it, toys? I mean, for kids, you know, playground equipment. And it was really a nice place. And that lasted for several years. But it seemed like the creek was just made for that. On the north side, it was a ripple, and then it just for little kids. And then as farther down the creek you came, the deeper it got. And they even had lifeguards there in the summertime. So it was really a nice place. Now, another thing I've got to tell you, I worked for Tracy Diobus for 6 years right after I got out of high school, and that's when things were really cheap. Of course, everything else was cheap. You didn't make much money, but when customers would come in, we would wait on them. They would say, I want a can of peas. We'd go get a can of peas and bring it back and set it on the counter. They want a can of fruit. You'd go get a can of fruit and set it on the counter. And that's the way we took care of a business back in the early 1930s. And then all at once, I had a grocery store in 1946 up to 58, and that's when it went to self-serve.
Now, Ed, tell us about where that building is located today.
Which one?
The store that...
The store that I had is in the Jerry Hoover Insurance Building. I also killed my own beef and my own pork, and had a slaughterhouse across the creek where that used car place is now, right there. Walter Bacall used to do all the butchering for me. And we sold, you might say, home-dressed meat. It was really good meat. Now, anything else? I don't know. Things were really cheap back then. When I worked for Tracy Dyewas, coffee was 3 pounds for 59 cents, and hamburger was 3 pounds for a quarter. But today, it's a different story. I guess that's about all I have.
Well, Ed, what you just mentioned one evening as we was having these meetings of really getting this thing together about the water lines and things that was laid up on the square when those were put in and how they was putting the streets in. Can you give us any?
They put Sandusky Street in, I think in the around 38 or 39, and they put sewer lines in down through there. Yeah, and of course Main Street was. I remember when they put brick on it. You know, when they came up to right where the where Shenars is. That's where they stopped right there. And they went clear down to where Tom Updike's filling station used to be on the corner where you go over the railroad.
At 95.
And also the Depot Hill, they did that. And then later, the next year or two, they did Sandusky Street. Oh, also at the foundry, they had a sideline that back in the late 20s when radios come out, they made radio benches. And the benches were made out of cast iron legs, and the top was upholstered. And my mother and Al Studer used to do the upholstering in our basement, and they sold an awful bunch of those things. They made a footstool and a radio bench to sit on to tune in your radio. And we've got the footstool here. Are you taking a picture, Jake?
Yes.
The foundry. And they also made a larger one, a radio bench seat that you could sit on to tune in your radio. But they made a lot of these things. I guess that's it.
Thank you, Ed, for sharing that with us. This concludes my part of the video. At this time, we're going to turn it over to Ray Davis, our moderator.
My name is Ray Davis, and I've lived in the Fredericktown area for more than half a century. But tonight, we have several people who have been around this town a lot longer than that. And they're going to share with us some thoughts of the early years of Fredericktown. Tonight, we're holding this meeting in the new community library on June the 25th, 1997. Our first speaker tonight will be John Jones. John, you have the floor.
Well, first I'd like to mention about the business places in Fredericktown, because later on I'll relate to those. There's the J.B. Foot Foundry, Edward Sheet Metal Products, F.B. Zig Manufacturing, Greg Manufacturing, X Gates, L.H. Brenninger Cement Products, Laboring Produce, H.W. Updike Elevator, Northwestern Elevator, Broomback Products, Licking Creamery, Stockyards, Fredericktown Depot, and H.E. Flynn Lumber. There might be some others there that I have missed, but I thought we might just comment on the business that we're in Fredericktown about this time. And first I'd like to talk about my father and his theater business in Fredericktown. And first, my father was born in the late 1800s, and he worked in various agriculturally related products in Knox County, as well as a painter. And in about 1900 or 1902, he decided he wanted to go into business for himself. So he went in and he bought a livery stable. And this is the livery stable here that he bought. Now, many people, especially young people, question as to what a livery stable is. A livery stable is where they keep horses and buggies, because, as I just said, there's a lot of manufacturing in Fredericktown, and people came in on the train. They stayed at the hotels we have in Fredericktown, the Yours Hotel, the Wagner Hotel, Commercial House, and then they'd come up to my father's and they would rent a horse or buggy or wagon to go out through the communities to go to Waterford, Batemantown, Yankeetown to small groceries. So my father continued in the livery business for quite some time, and then the automobiles began to get kind of popular. So he decided to go out of the livery business, and he was in question what to get into, so he built a theater, this being the theater here. At the same time, there's a automotive related business on this side, a garage and sales room. And this theater contained about 250 seats, had 2 projectors in it, and a stage, and a good many times we'd have stage plays in there. But as you all know, that the first pictures were silent pictures. And just to give you an idea of silent pictures, and some of you probably don't even remember these people, but and these are kind of foreign to me, but this is one of the very early Max Sennett. This is Arbuckle, called Fatty Arbuckle, and this was another picture of Fatty Arbuckles, and these were all probably in the late 20s. But in the silent pictures, as you know, there was no sound connected with them, and so there was a player piano in there, and as the action got real tense, so the piano would play a little bit louder, and then it would play softer, and the idea was to follow along with the silent pictures. Now, in the picture show, too, it was kind of interesting to me that J.B. Foote, in his painting, had painted 3 pictures on each side of the theater building, as well as a drop screen for the stage. And sometimes we ran pictures on Wednesday night, Saturday night, sometimes Sunday night. And during the Depression, things got kind of scarce, and some of the businessmen decided to go together, and they turned the projectors around and had a screen over on Moore's Barn. People came to Fredericktown, they had all kind of seats and popcorn and everything, and they sat out in the street with their lawn chairs and everything to see the pictures. Of course, one of the big things was the cereals. They had cereals, and as many of you know, the cereals always ended in a very abrupt manner, and you'd have to come back in the following week to see what happened. But in about 1928, 29, they told us that the movies were going to talk, and I could not believe that the movies were ever going to talk. But nevertheless, the first movies, they had the movies, and then they had a record along with the projector, which didn't always synchronize. So sometimes the lips on the pictures would be in one position, and on the record would be something else. Later on, they developed a system where they had the sound right along with the picture. And some of the earlier cowboys were Tom Mix and Hoot Gibson and Buck Jones, and this seemed to be what the people of Fredericktown liked, the movies. So we had one here that I was always proud of this. My father, Gene Autry was one of the more popular singing cowboys. So this is Gene Autry, John Jones Sr. and John Jones Jr. And this is Gene Autry and John Jones Sr.
Now, John, if I might interject here, exactly where was your theater located, and what is the building now?
The building was located at 16 East College Street, and right now it's a travel agency and beauty parlor, and I guess there's apartments upstairs. But I guess I neglected to say that this all took place to build the theater in about 1915, 16, and it was finished in 17. And the theater was pretty successful, and run along even during the war, and then as television began to get more popular, why it began to kind of fade out. So my father closed the theater in about 1954.
I remember going to the theater when I was a child. We went to town with a quarter, and I think we spent 15 cents at the theater. And after the theater, we spent the other dime at Dial Bliss's grocery for a box of popcorn.
Right. Yeah.
So we blew our money all in one night. Anything else, John?
No, I think that's pretty much the story of my father's business in the theater and livery stable.
We thank you for that. Our next speaker, Mrs. Eva Hosig. Eva?
Well, I think John outdid me with pictures. I don't have any. But I have been in Fredericktown since I was 5 years old, and we did come here for a business. I remember well the trip from Chesterville in a horse and buggy and a wagon with a team of horses, all our belongings behind us. And we coming into town, why we could see the water tower, and my dad told me that that's where we would get our water and had to climb up there to get it, so that was quite a mystery. And we came here for my dad and mother to take over the Bell Telephone Exchange. At that time, there was two different companies here, the Bell and the Citizen. Now the Citizen, my mother was the operator for day and night, but they did have one relief operator, and she was Artie Martz, and she was the wife of Frank Martz, our old photographer. And then, and my dad was a telephone lineman. Now the Citizen Company was upstairs over what was the auto body place there. And then the Bell was on down Main Street over a whole block. And let's see, as you know, when you get as old as I am, your memory's not very good. The Bell, yeah, was on down Main Street, and it was upstairs over Haggerty's grocery. But that Haggerty's was a grocery and a hardware and a shoe store all combined. And the telephone office was in the front room, and then there were 5 rooms to the back, and that was our living quarters. And then next to it was the old Struble Bank and Dr. Ackerman's office. And my parents replaced the other people that had the office. It was Wickersham's. And they were going to California. And Mr. Wickersham was a brother to my grandmother Turner. I think that's how we landed the job. And then the other businesses were, these businesses were all where the First Knox National Bank is now. And let's see. And then at that time, why Fredericktown was just a very up-and-coming business. On Saturday nights, you could hardly get down Main Street. And there were some shows shown by John's parents, and that was really the main entertainment of the town at that time. By living on Main Street then, the first ones that I could remember and got acquainted with near my age was Elmer Shippecassie and Wendell Fink. So that's been quite some time. And let's see. Well, and later on, the Bell Company consolidated with Mount Vernon, and my dad was a lineman then for Mount Vernon. So that was the history of my trip to Fredericktown, and I don't think I could ever been in a better place to live.
Eva, can you remember about how many residences had telephones at that time?
Oh, at that time, see, by 2 companies, all these business places had 2 telephones. No, he spoke up, Norman, the other night when I was telling that your dad, Wendell, didn't your dad have 2 telephones in his business? One for the Citizen, one for the Bell.
Can you tell us about what the number sequence was?
Yes, I'll tell you, the old Hosig store was number 11 and 13.
So
that was
that-
Mary and Fred Hosig store.
So the businesses more or less had simple numbers.
Well, they went, I don't know, but the ones I know of were.
Did you have the old ring?
Oh, yeah,
telephone?
yeah. Mhm.
About when did the dial phone come in? Do you
Oh, I have
remember?
no idea, no. This happened about 1917, is what I'm talking about.
Okay, and when did you retire from the phone company?
I don't know how long my dad was there. I don't really remember that. It wasn't too long because they consolidated with Mount Vernon. Now, the Citizen office was here much, many more years than that. I don't know.
Okay. Thank you, Eva, for that. Next, we have Eamon Ritchie, longtime owner, operator of Ritchie's Market. Eamon, you have the floor, if you like.
Well, let me tell you about our family. We moved to Fredericktown in 1928. And at that time, we bought out the ice delivery service that was being done in Fredericktown from the Northwestern Elevator. And so we started making ice in Fredericktown, which before it was all being hauled in from Mount Vernon. So at that time, whenever the frost would come in the fall, all the customers would quit buying ice. They'd put their stuff in window boxes and things like that. So at that time, after a couple of years of that, we decided we were going to sell milk. So we bought a cow and started out delivering milk. At that time, we sold raw milk, and we delivered milk twice a day, in the morning and evening. At that time, a lot of people only bought milk by pints, and some of them in quarts, because the milk didn't keep very good. So we did that for a while, and we continued to add to the dairy till we had 3 cows. And we bought a Model A Ford and used the coupe and used the trunk to deliver the milk in. So that's how our milk business started back then. And we continued with the milk, expanding the milk more so than the ice, because at that time the ice wasn't very, people weren't all buying ice. But as time went on, the ice business, they started making ice refrigerators that would keep ice longer, and then we started delivering ice to the farmers. We had worked up to 7 ice trucks. Each truck had 2 routes, a morning route and an afternoon route, and they would deliver ice that way. And of course we had open trucks at that time, and the ice wouldn't keep too long in the truck with just the canvas over it. And we used to deliver ice to Chesterville and Sparta and Waterford, Yankeetown, and Batemantown, and we went clear over to, and we went into Mount Vernon too. We had 2 trucks that used to go into Mount Vernon. And then of course we went to Centerburg and over in that direction. So the ice business continued to grow until about the end of World War II. At that time, they started putting electricity in the farm areas, and as they were able to get electricity, they started buying electric refrigerators, and the ice business started to die. In 1946, we went into the locker business, and that's when it was getting real big. We kept that going, and where people would rent lockers and put frozen food in there, and of course we did kill animals down across the Depot Bridge in the building where there's a garage down there now. So we kept that going until we just closed the store here a year ago. And so that part of the business is gone too. And the grocery business, of course, kept dying down to where it wasn't paying its way, and we shut it down. And that was the way the business was going that way.
I could interject. Do I remember my grandmother having a square card in her window telling the iceman how many pounds of ice to bring in?
Yeah, they were about a foot square, and they were divided up in 4 sections, 25 pound, 50 pound, 75, and 100. They would put the card up, that way the iceman could see how much they want. And then after they got in, we used to have ice books that you could buy like $5 worth or $10 worth, and they had coupons in there, 25 pound, 50 pound, 75 pound, and 100. So you could buy the size book that you wanted, and you would put your coupon on top of the ice box, and the iceman would take the coupon. He wouldn't have to make change every day.
I thought this was a very unique way of saving the iceman 2 trips into the house.
Yeah.
One to ask how many pounds you wanted, and then carrying the ice in.
Yeah,
Very good idea.
I still got some of the ice cards and some of the coupon books yet.
You have something else
And
to
I
show?
still have milk caps, about 50,000 that we had left over when we sold our milk route. The reason we had so many, we used to have to contract for the caps in advance to get the price right. So after we got rid of our routes, they were still coming that we had paid for. And that's how I ended up with so many milk caps. Every once in a while somebody has a milk bottle and I tell them, do you want a milk cap for that? And I keep passing them out. That's pretty good. Well, this was the picture I was going to put in of my whole family, my father and mother and all of my brothers.
Now, were all of those people connected with the business, the Richies?
Well, all of them were for a while, and my brother Sam, when he graduated from high school, he went to college and became a druggist. So he didn't stay with the ice plant business until all the rest of them did. And then Sperry finally left to go to California. That was in, I think, 1959.
I remember Sperry being the fire chief for several years.
Yeah, he was fire chief. I was on the fire department for 46 years, and I was on the emergency squad for 18 years. That was a good experience that I
I'm sure the community owes you a great debt for all of your volunteerism.
had. I don't know, maybe would you want to know what happened on our parking lot? The parking lot in the early beginning was what they called Fort Frederick. And whenever the Indians would get unruly and start coming to town, the main part of town at that time was mostly up around the square. And everybody would run down to the fort. And the fort set on the site of where the parking lot is today. And after that, when the building was first built on that lot, it was a skating rink. And Bill Zalman, I think, built the building, if I remember right. And after it was a skating rink, they turned it into a pool room and a dance hall. They had a dance hall in there for a while, and then they gradually put in a restaurant in part of it. And then they added a bowling alley to it, and that was the way that part of the building went. And the next section of the building down there, the light-colored brick, used to be the Presbyterian Church. The Presbyterian Church used to sit on Main Street, down there where the Paul Cochran was, where that building was set. So when Blackburns bought that building, put the building up, they jacked up the Presbyterian church and moved it back on the lot that's between the Main Street building and the other building. And that's what come into there. One thing that happened in the new building, in the Blackburn building, that Mr. Blackburn invented one of the things that helped the movie business. It was a device that separated the pictures for a second. When the film was running, they used to flicker years ago, and it would stop the picture long enough to be able to show the picture, and then it would move to the next one. And that's what was in that part of the building. And we put our ice plant in that section of the light brick. That was pretty interesting to see how that went on that way. And I think that's the rest of it you probably all remember now.
Well, Eamon, we certainly thank you for that, and we'll always remember Richie's Supermarket, I'm sure.
Thank you.
We still miss them.
Our next speaker will be Bill Brown, Waterford area farmer and maple syrup man. Bill?
Well, I was invited to give a short history of the big city of Waterford, which I have lived beside of since 1926. It's located 5 miles west of Fredericktown, which is known as the Zanesville-Tiffin Road. The first leverings to come to Olive Creek Valley was William, who came with John Ackerman and Elder John Cook in 1810. Cook and Levering had married sisters, and from Fredericktown they followed an Indian trail to what was to become Waterford. Here they found 2 Mitchell brothers who had settled and partially cleared some land. One of the Mitchells was a surveyor and helped the 3 men to select land along the creek, with Ackerman, the oldest, taking the first section, which is intersected by Lanning Road. Cook took the second section, which includes the present North Fork Cemetery, and Levering taking the land up to now what is 314. From then on, more of the Leverings came from the east and settled in Waterford area. A section of land was set aside at Daniel Levering, which was a brother of William, for a cemetery, which is now known as Levering Cemetery. The first burial was Allen Levering, who died January the 26th, 1817. And the undertaker that built his coffin did not get it finished in time to have the burial in the daytime, so he was buried at night. The last burial is Kenneth Levering, who was interned in 1993. In 1825, William Levering built a horse-powered grist mill on the farm. Later, Daniel Levering built a water-powered mill which stood just west of the new bridge on Levering Road. Parts of the old mill race can be seen on several farms. Daniel Levering also had a sawmill. The first Methodist church was built in Waterford in 1844. The land for this church was purchased from Noah Levering for $42.90. This building remained a place of worship until consolidation with the Presbyterians in 1914. This building later became the Waterford store for many years. The present Church of Christ was originated in Mara County, just over the Knox County line. The old building was moved to Fredericktown and made into the Bollinger Funeral Home. In 1906, a block and stone structure was built in Waterford. This building was raised, and the present brick building was dedicated in 1970. The present Methodist Church stands in the west end of Waterford, and this was built by the Presbyterians, and the land was purchased for $70. For some reason, the Presbyterians decided that they would disband, and so the Methodists took over the building as it stands there today. The same year that the first church was built, Charles Wagner built a tavern called the Blue Goose directly across the street from the church. And this was on the main road from Zanesville to Tiffin, and the Blue Goose was a favorite stopping place for traveling salesmen and others who regularly made the journey. A meal usually consisted of 2 or 3 kinds of meat, 2 or 3 vegetables, and a great choice of pastries, and an unlimited variety of drinks. One of the frequent winter customers of the Blue Goose was a clown named Burke, who married a girl from Waterford and was the father of Billy Burke, who was the wife of Flo Zingfield, the genius of the Zingfield Follies. There was also overnight accommodations at the Blue Goose. Knox County history lists in 1912 that Waterford had a post office. The Postal Service had the mailing address as Levering because there was another Waterford in southern Ohio. Old Ohio maps also show Levering as a dot on the map instead of Waterford. Also listed as a gristmill, 2 churches, schoolhouse, Oddfellow Hall, 2 stores, a hotel, a blacksmith shop, a shoemaker, a lawyer, and a barber. Waterford also had several doctors and dentists. The present home owned by Warren and Sheila Beck was built by Dr. Turner to be used as a hospital. Dr. Hill practiced there for several years and he married my father's sister. The largest event held in Waterford for many years was the Levering Reunion. Several of the descendants of William, John, and Daniel Levering had a meeting and decided they should have a Levering family reunion. The committee set the date of August 6, 1891, as it would likely be a large gathering. They selected the Mr. E.W. Brown Picnic Grove, and Mr. E.W. Brown was my grandfather, as a place and this was on land that was previously owned by Daniel Levering, and by E.W. Brown being a Levering by marriage, why that was the reason that they chose the grove. And later on, this also became known as the Waterford picnic. But the Levering reunion was held in Browns Woods until late 1950s and was then moved to Wayne's Grange Hall. The reunion is now being held in different Levering homes. Now this part that I have just told you, Tarl Noble helped me find a lot of the material for. Now getting down to stories that I have heard about Waterford. Stories about the Levering reunion. There was a parade formed in Waterford led by the Waterford Band through the Grove. A traffic director was needed to direct the horse and buggies in turning down the road from Waterford. I've read 2 different articles in regard to this. The one article said that the first reunion had 5,000 people there, the other one said 4,000. So you can take your choice as to which one you want to believe. One event that many people have told me about, one year a thunderstorm came up and lightning hit a tree and killed one of the buggy horses. Waterford as I remember it. I went to school in Waterford for 4 years, and then we were consolidated into Fredericktown, and the rest of the years then I went into Fredericktown school. The school was on the first floor of the Oddfellows Hall. Now there was a rope across the stairway up to the 2nd floor to the Oddfellows part of it, and we were threatened with our life as much as ever stepped onto that stairway and tried to go upstairs and see what was upstairs. For several years, we had free movies in Waterford. The truck with the projector would park in front of the school, and the movie was shown on the side of the school building. The school property was eventually purchased by Bill Ogle, who was a barn builder. The building was torn down, and the property is now owned by my son Kelly and his family. Several of the old foundation stones are next to the alley that runs behind the property. The Waterford store was in the old original Methodist Church building property, and the proprietors that I can remember of were Billy Owens, who was also an auctioneer, Lee Stillwell, Robert Carlin, Orlo Spillerman, and Eccles Gadd was the last store proprietor in Waterford. I also remember the cream station, which Evie Allwine was the owner. The local farmers would take their cream to her, and she would test it for butterfat, and then it was emptied into 10-gallon milk cans and picked up for further processing. Eva also had a parrot, and she kept in the station, and we kids spent a lot of time talking to it. Her husband, Clint, had a blacksmith shop for many years and later had an automobile repair shop. They had a son, Howard, that was a local livestock trucker hauling stock to the yards in Fredericktown and Mount Vernon. When I was a senior in high school and the rationing was on for gasoline, Howard took the FFA boys over to Columbus in his truck to the state convention and then came back and picked us up. That's the way we got to the FFA convention. I have also been told about the Waterford Academy. The only part I remember is a house that the William Grubaugh family lived in, and this building has burned. There is a large concrete building across the street from Kelly's that was a store and then a feed mill for a few years. The building was purchased by Howard Wyman, and it was his residence, and he also had a repair shop there for several years and would repair automobiles and machinery, whatever you happen to have. Waterford now has a large Amish community surrounding it. The latest newsworthy event happening in Waterford was in 1995 when a BFI garbage truck collapsed the bridge on Levering Road. Everyone in the community at some time or other came to see this great happening. They had to bring in a large crane from Columbus to remove the truck, and this was a day-and-a-half operation. It's pretty much what I know about Waterford.
Bill, I think it's quite interesting that your farm is located on Quaker Road. Very interesting because of so many Amish families in the area.
Well, see, the reason that our road was named Quaker Road, down where it used to intersect with State Route 13, there was a large Quaker settlement in that area, and the Quaker Cemetery was located there, and there was also a Quaker schoolhouse there. And of course, the schoolhouse is long gone.
Very interesting. Thank you, Bill. Our next speaker will be Norman Fink. I remember Norman from being a pharmacist at Fink's drugstore, and he made a really good ice cream soda. Norman?
Thank you. Well, Dad started a store in 1904, which he bought from a gentleman by the name of Wilkie Weicker, which there are relatives still in the community, and ran it until 1949 when I got back from the service. And I took a store over then and I ran it till 1975. which time I sold it to the Montaneries, who now own it and run it. And some of the history of the store. We used to run a bus line through the town, Mansfield to Newark. They stopped in front of the store. We sold tickets. We had a bench fixed up in front of one of the windows, and people could sit on it and wait on the bus to come, or read some of our magazines. We, my brother and I decided we ought to fix that bench up. So we wired it with a Ford spark coil. And it was kind of interesting.
Well, I remember that.
We also had a town fountain out in front of the store, cement fountain. I don't know how it got there, but anyway, it used to be a place to put all the freshmen on it, wet their pants for initiation.
I was initiated on it.
Quite a few people were in Fredericktown. That's about the history of the drugstore. We've got some pictures around here somewhere. That's about all I can tell you.
Norm, I remember going into the store as a kid. Up overhead of your windows, you had some large pictures of Fredericktown. Are those still around?
I don't know. I don't have any idea.
I checked with the Historical Society, and they don't seem to know anything about them, but I thought if those could ever be found, those would really be good to have donated.
Jack Fern, when he came back from the service, had a pilot's license. And he flew me around Fredericktown, and I took those pictures. But whatever happened to them, I don't know.
Well, as I remember, that was the last great ice cream parlor in Fredericktown. Everyone enjoyed that. Our next speaker, Mr. George Divalbus, longtime owner and operator of Divalbus Grocery on North Main and West College Street. George?
What do you want?
Right ahead. You have the floor.
All I can tell you is that about the Tom's and Divalbus popcorn stand. First night we sold popcorn, we took in $5 and we made $1 a piece. The next time we had a big sale, we sold 1,750 boxes at the Centennial. And we used about 37 pounds of butter that night. Because we always put butter in the popcorn, because if you didn't put butter in it, it wasn't good. With butter in it, you could sell a man 2 boxes, but if it didn't have butter, you'd only sold 1.
About how much was a box of popcorn back then, George?
10 cents. We sold 1,750 boxes one day during the Centennial, $175, and that was the biggest day we ever had.
Can you tell us about what year your father, Tracy, opened the store?
1924.
And it lasted until when?
1948, I think it was. Wasn't it, Bob?
1960.
60. Your dad died in 47, but you run until 1960.
Yeah.
Until 1960, and that it was when the automotive store moved into that building?
I think so.
And the automotive store was there until just this last year, 1996, when they moved up to the Ritchie's building. Is there anything else, George?
Only those milkshakes that I got at Fink's. Never went there to milkshake like that, no matter where you went.
They were great.
Oh God, man, they were the only one that I can remember to this day. Just like if I walked in there, after we closed the popcorn stand, we always had the dish of chocolate with marshmallow on it. That was the cap sheet for the popcorn business on Saturday night.
Do you remember many people in town on Saturday night, George?
Nobody else but people.
Nobody else.
You had to go, you elbow your way through.
Go right ahead.
You had to elbow your way through if you wanted to get up past the popcorn stand. And then if you had a dime, you was lucky and you went to the New Jones Theater to see the show.
I remember that well, going to the theater and then going to your popcorn stand. Your son Joe ran it when I was there. Did he make any money for you?
He didn't amount to much. He didn't last long. Danny Stagger run it the night we had the big sale and sold 150 boxes. That was Danny Stagger.
Anything else, George, about the store that you can remember? I know my grandparents shopped there quite frequently, and I remember going in as a young boy into the store and buying candy bars on our way back to school. We had a lot of school students at noon.
Oh yeah, a lot of them picked up. I've got money since then for people that borrowed too many candy bars and paid me for them later.
Well, at least you have a few honest people around.
Yeah, you know most everybody's honest. When we had a credit in a grocery store, for years and years we had credit. One time we figured up we only lost 1/2 of 1%. Two bad bills.
I'm sure the credit card people today would love to have had that average.
Yeah, I expect so.
Well, George, we really appreciate you being here this evening. Is there anything else you'd like to reminisce with?
I thought of something a minute ago, but it's gone. Bob, what do you got to say?
Huh?
Well, maybe we can come back, George, if you
Okay, if
remember.
I think of something, I'll tell you.
Thank you.
Milkshakes were the best. So just mark that down in the book.
Our next speaker will be Rick Long, longtime editor, publisher, owner of the Knox County Citizen. Rick?
Well, I'm a recent resident of the town, you might say. I'm not an old timer like the rest of you. We moved here in 1941 in the fall and bought an interest of the paper from Ruby Tucker. The next spring I bought the other 2/3 and owned it till 1977, 35 years to the day. And the reason I had it come out that way, with all the reports that had to be made out, I wanted to come out right with the quarter so that I get all my taxes paid according to the quarter of the year. As far as I know, there's been 5 papers in Fredericktown starting back going back to 1845. The Rainbow, the Independent, Free Press, and the Courier, and the Citizen, in which the Citizen is dated and it started in 1922. And probably the most famous of the papers was this Free Press printed on calico. And the story behind that is this is taken from the Citizen of March 27, 1947, 50 years ago. Calico Charlie issue of Free Press of 1879 wins in radio contest. A copy of the Fredericktown Free Press of October 18, 1879, excuse me, printed on calico, received the most unusual newspaper award offered on the Ruth Lyons, now many of you remember Ruth Lyons, WLW morning matinee program. The paper was submitted by Harry L. Rawson of Mount Vernon, I believe. If I'm not mistaken, he used to live in Fredericktown at one time. I'm not sure that.
Yeah, relatives.
Deputy in the office of probate judge W.H. Clark. The edition is printed on calico to celebrate the election of Calico Charlie Foster as governor of Ohio. Calico Charlie, a native of Fostoria, was later Secretary of the Treasury under President Benjamin Harrison. The reprint of the paper, which it says "She Booms," and it was out. It was the news came by wire from Columbus, Ohio. She Booms for Calico Charlie and John Sherman, Esquire, Ohio. Another case of didn't know it was loaded. News as it came to us, and so forth. And it says that he's going to win by 20,000, and the Democrats were very disappointed, and so on. And they kept getting. It says they got. This is the way they handled news in those days. Said they got 17 bullets, 17 bulletins from 8:45 p.m. through the early morning of October 15th.
Eric, what, in all your years as publisher, what was the most newsworthy event in Fredericktown?
Probably the centennial.
And what year would that be?
50.
Yeah.
Somebody's probably going to talk about it.
19
There wasn't hardly anything going to be done, it seemed like. The year came of the centennial, and I don't have a copy of it, but I ran across the top of the paper just one line about this is the year of the centennial. And 3 women, one of them Mrs. Fink, who were the other 2, started to write a history of Fredericktown. And we ran columns, almost the whole year. And then just before the centennial, I put out a big issue. I hired Jack Marks to come and work for me. And he helped edit it. And for that, we got the first prize in the state of Ohio for the size of the paper on special editions. So that was quite an event.
Eric, are you still associated with the newspaper in any way?
Only that I rent the rooms to the owner. I still own the building and all the antique machinery. I didn't sell any of the printing machinery. I'm still in the letterpress printing business. Mr. Hurt, publishing company, rents the front rooms from me, and I write a column every week what happened 50 years. That's how I run across this in 1947.
Week with interest, your 50-year column.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting.
Thank you. You are one of the 3 then, yeah.
Very interesting. And thank you, Eric, for that.
Now, I would say this paper probably here, somebody handed, I don't know where it came from, but it looks to me about 50 years old. Hominy grits, 12 cents. And I eat hominy every morning. They're about 10 times that much now. A box of hominy, southern stuff.
It's very interesting to look back at the prices of groceries 50 years ago, but we also have to remember we weren't making quite as much money
Well, that's true.
back then.
I think there were about 10 groceries here when we moved to town, counting what was out of Waterford and Bateman Town, possibly Aggie Town, I'm not sure. Down on South Main Street, there was 1 or 2, you know.
Well, we certainly enjoyed your talk this evening, and thank you very much, Gary. Our next speaker, longtime railroad engineer, Johnny Swank, member of the Board of Public Affairs presently. John, you have the floor.
Well, I was born and raised up around Aggie-town, and the only thing that I can think of really happened up around there was the time that Paul Guthrie and Paul Eister, Howard Barton, and my brother stole that airplane and wrecked it. And they got caught, and they had to fix it back up. And Brewer Tom's blacksmith shop was up there, and I go down to visit it quite frequently. And played with the Tom boys, Harry and Ray. And then I used to come down here to Fredericktown once in a while and go out here to an old fellow that took care of the water pumping station. His name was Dipsy Goodall, and he hammered saws. But I could never understand how he could hammer them saws and knew where to hit them to make them run straight. But it really used to fascinate me to watch him hammer them and listen to him. He used a hammer about like a sledgehammer. Do you remember that, George?
I remember people coming at midnight to get him to, when he lived next door to me, and they'd bring in, have him on the back of a car and haul him in from town and have him work on them.
Yeah.
And I, like you, I never did know how he did it.
But other than that, that's about it. And then I used to go around to Fake's drugstore, and Mr. Fake, he would say, if you win a football game, if you win this game now today or a basketball game, I'll give everybody on the team a milkshake. And
Hooray!
and we'd go in there, and that was about as much as I got to say about the way things was done and the way people operated around here.
Well, John, can you elaborate on this airplane theft a little more for us?
Well, I went down and talked to my sister about it. She thought it was in the spring of 1927 because he got killed in August of 1927. So she thought it was in the spring, and the airplane was right over there in Bechtels Field, north of the cemetery over there in Angrytown, set up there by the woods. And the guy came in there and made an emergency landing and pulled it up there next to the woods. Sat there too long to see Paul Guthrie and them three other guys, so they went up and took a little spin.
Now, did it have gasoline and everything in it at the time?
Yeah, it had a little bit, but they wouldn't get some gas someplace. She was telling me, I was down there Sunday talking to her. She said they wouldn't got gas someplace to put in that thing. Took it up, and everything went good for the first 2 or 3 flights that they made, but I think the 4th flight is when this thing got messed up with the wires over there. And, oh yeah, I wasn't very big, but I remember they came up there, it was in the evening when they came to pick him up. And he's going to take my brother to jail. And I wasn't too fond of that. But
Well, was this an open cockpit type plane?
Open cockpit plane. 2 wings. Oh yeah.
An old biplane.
Biplane. That's where it happened. They parked it up there. I have no idea what happened, but anyway, but Paul Guthrie later on, he became a pilot and flew a lot of people around, I guess.
John, was the feed mill in Hackneytown at the time?
Yeah, I was on that, his name was Richardson, Cecil Richardson got killed. I was standing on the elevator platform up there when the train hit her that day. There was a local come down there. And, do you remember that, Bob?
Yeah.
And he handed the orders on to the engineer. And she was there at the crossing and got hit.
How many years were you an engineer, John?
Well, actually, running an engine, started running in 1947. I quit in 85. So 47, 57, 67, 77, 87. So I ran an engine about 38 years.
Now, was that the only job you held on the railroad?
Well, I fired first on the railroads, and then I got promoted to an engineer.
Do you have to take an examination to be an engineer?
Yeah. You take an examination, physical characteristics for railroad, air machinery and book of rules, timetable, space instructions. It's just almost have to give them a life history.
Do you remember any bad accidents while you were engineering?
Yeah, Christmas Eve over in Scio, I was on a passenger train, hit a vehicle over there, and I knew we was gonna hit that car. There was nothing I could do about it. It was going 70 miles an hour. We hit him, and there was 5 of them in it. That's what we thought was in it, but they actually was 6. And the next, Christmas morning, it snowed that night. And the next morning, they found a guy with an army coat on, laying along the fence. And that's the only one survived out of that wreck. And, yeah, it put the chills right up your back at times to watch people. You know, to me, they didn't have no respect for their own lives or nobody else's because they just drive around in the gates like they meant nothing. Where the gates is down, they call them short arm gates where they drive around.
Well, John, we really appreciate you being here this evening and sharing your thoughts of early Fredericktown with us and Agnew-town. Our next speaker, longtime store owner, Mr. Bob Sargent. Bob?
Thank you. I want to say something. John over there and I, we were first grade boys in Fredericktown, and the first grade, I had to we had a teacher, Helen Helen Cook, and I was her pet, and I was sitting on her lap, and I fall off of it in the waste basket. But anyway, George and I, we have things to do on the groceries. And I was a freshman in college, in Fredericktown, and I worked for Mr. Weiss. And he had a meat market. And he sold the meat market to Willard Mayer. And I worked for Willard. And in 1942, I bought the meat market, and we used to deal with farmers for cattle and hogs.
Now, was your meat market located where the Pepe's Pizza is now?
Yes.
Today?
Yes. And we done our business back in the back of there.
I remember that store very well. Again, my grandparents visited your store quite often.
Yes.
And I know you were quite a sports enthusiast. Can you tell us anything about some really fine football players from Fredericktown?
Oh, we had them. We had them. But the that I have to mention is Ollie Klein and Taxi Saver. And they were good. But John here, he was a good boy, and you were, and we had him. And
As I remember, Taxi and Ollie were on the same team together.
that's right. Yes. And
This was in the early 40s, was it not?
yes, 40, 44, isn't it, Jake?
43, 44.
Yeah,
Well, it was a freshman when I came here.
yeah.
41.
But
I think that class went 3 years undefeated, if I'm
oh yes, they did. I for years I was the timekeeper for Fredericktown, and they was good boys, and Fredericktown always had a good team.
I remember well you and a couple of other people keeping time on the field behind the offensive team.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That's right. One day, Riley from Danville, he was with me on the back of the offense. We were doing the timing, and I said, Riley, this boy over here, he's not going to get very far, and so, but I want him to kick a goal for Fredericktown. And he says, well, let's let the we'll do the thing. I said, okay. And Jimmy Kearns, my boy was the quarterback, and I told Gerald, I said, call Jimmy out. And he did, and he kicked a 39 field goal.
39-yard field goal.
Yeah.
I remember that well. I think I was a freshman at that time.
Yeah. So, but anyway, my sword was we had a time at a number of times, and George's dad, he would buy meat from me. And so I would, one day I took him a pan of ground beef over, you know, and
Before we had meat over the stove.
yes, and Tracy was doing the cans of food on the counter, and like that, you know, when I went out the door, and he sat down, and he says, "Damn you," and I went out the door, and I was halfway out in the street, and he had a tomato, and he threw it, and it right there.
He was a pretty good thrower.
Oh, yes. Yes. He was a good man, George's dad.
Right.
May I say something? You used to bring a tray of hamburger over to the store, that's where we had meat. And if you and Tracy didn't have a ball game to bet on, you bet on shooting pennies or something to the crack in the
That's
floor.
right.
They had to bet on something all the time.
Yeah, Main Street was good, wasn't it, George?
Oh, yeah. A lot of penny pitching out there for a long time, I'll tell you.
That's right.
I don't know who won, I guess nobody did. Didn't matter.
But anyway, George's dad and him and I, we had good things to do. John over there.
I'm sure the downtown merchants have fond thoughts and memories of the early years in Fredericktown.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Bob, we appreciate you being here this evening and sharing your thoughts with us. And stop back anytime.
Thank you.
Our next speaker, Mr. Wendell Fink, is a charter member along with Eamon Ritchie of the Fredericktown Lions Club. Wendell, you have the floor.
Thank you, Craig. This is going to be on the cemetery. Funny things that have happened, and I put some of them down. I got railroaded into being president of the trustees one summer. Alec Huggins was the president, and he was down in Florida at the VA work. And so he wanted to know if I'd be president, and I said, what do you have to do? Oh, you just go to meetings. Well, that was a small part about it. But we had quite a time. I'll start off, this isn't consecutive by any manner of means. Anything came to mind while I put it down. We had quite a few break-ins out there because our maintenance building was clear back from the back end. And 2 weeks before Memorial Day, we went out there and all the self-propelled Toros were gone. So we had to buy 2 new ones and 2 used ones. Then in the early fall, they broke in again, and they wiped us pretty clean that time. They stole a dump truck, 4 mowers, all the hand tools, shovels, pick, axe, saws, rakes, hoes, plus an American flag. And the only thing they left was a tractor, and the only reason for that, they couldn't get it loaded on the truck because there was no planks that were running up on. So we had no idea where the thing didn't have license plates on it because we just ran around the cemetery. So along in the spring, a man called from Reynoldsburg called Bill McMahon. He says there's a dump truck sitting over here next to the Sears Village store in Eastland Shopping Center. He says, are you looking for a truck? Yeah, we were looking for a truck. He wanted to buy it. We told him, well, you have to go see the insurance company because they paid us off. I don't know what happened with them, but the battery was gone, and I presume the radiator was probably broken. And it wouldn't have been worth anything to fix it up. We were up without a truck, so we rented one from Dave Cocker, who was living out on 95 at that time, for $25 for each occasion. That arrangement lasted 2 years when he sold the truck to us.
Project here, we're talking about Forest Cemetery out on Sandusky Street.
Right.
Do you know about what year that was founded or opened up?
Yeah, 1857. That's the in the book for cemetery proceedings. That's when it started. But truly, I think the cemetery there must have been founded by some of the Strubles as a private thing because There's, let's see, there's about 36 spots in this section where the Strubles are buried. And I think that they probably started it as a family thing, and then other people wanted to get in. And originally, the cemetery only extended to where the main drive starts, and it was all on the west side. I've got a picture of the mausoleum, you know, it was first built, and there's no monuments or anything in front of that at that time. And where the mausoleum was is where the Legion has their services and Memorial Day. So to continue on, we decided that we'd been stolen so many times, people, so we built a new maintenance building down on right next to the street. And we got room enough in there. It's 24 by 46, cement floor.
I know you're a longtime Lions Club member. Can you tell us something about the 1950 sesquicentennial?
Yeah. The reason it was in 1950, the town was formally incorporated in 1850. So they decided to have the centennial in 1950 because that was 200 years old.
I remember seeing some video. I think you were a policeman, were you not?
I rode in a Pontiac convertible, and John Friedman was the driver.
I know they had a stockade on the square.
Oh, yeah.
Who was in charge of that? Do you remember?
Yeah, Don Bone, McKinley, Ed Studer. You can imagine what happened to them two.
Morris.
Yeah, Morris. They had an old Model T car they called the prowl car. He'd come up through the thing and blow on the horn. Had a big time. We had a raffle.
I've still got a hat that they give you when somebody come and bails you out.
Oh. Well, that's.
It says jail and bail.
Oh. So that's, yeah, that was a big time. We, Lions Club, put on a raffle about that same time. We finally got a car to give away. And all the money we made that night, we took over to Ed Studer's. He was across the street where, let's see, Interchurch is there now, I think. Anyway, he had a round dining room table, I don't know, 4 feet, and that thing was just full of paper money. We made $10,000 on that thing. That's the way we got the playground over.
That's how Marin Park got started?
Yeah. We put in a shelter house and skimmed that hill off.
And then the Labor Day celebrations began, is that correct? What year did the Lions Club start in Fredericktown?
1938.
And you and Eamon are charter members?
Yes, sir.
The only two around, I imagine.
Well, there's one other person, he doesn't live here, but he was charter member too, from Cleveland. Yeah. Well, we've come a long way. I don't know how long we're going to survive. Anyway.
I know the Lions Club has given thousands of dollars to the community projects, and I think you and all the members should be proud of what you've done for the community.
Thank you.
You don't mind my saying, almost every major project in the community was made by the Lions Club.
we
Even the
back-
library here,
We backed the Centennial.
yeah, the library,
It was the Lions project.
we pledged $30,000, and we paid, I think, all of it, and 5,000 so far.
Joe and this guy over here and this guy, they were good boys too in football.
Thank you, Bob.
Most of the people here in our previous meetings have called on about the story of Polly the Parrot, and we've been reserving that for you. So you want to relate that to the group here tonight?
Want it now or some other time?
Well, that's up to you, but as I say, several people have called on it.
Okay. Sam Tuttle lived in the house where the funeral home is now on East Cottage Street. And he was a merchant, and he was dabbling in everything. He had hardware stores, grocery store, sold meat, and also he gathered up butter and eggs and poultry and shipped it to New York. So on one of his safaris to New York, he met this broker. The broker talked him into buying this parrot. And so Sam brought it home and got a perch up there on that little porch above where you go into this front door at Snyder's in the summer when it was weather fitting. But in the course of time, the parrot picked up a lot of slang words, and Sam would take it down to the grocery or somewhere, and some of the ladies got mad at him because it was using a lot of language that they'd never heard, I guess. But anyway, Sam put him out in the backyard one day, and it was hot, about like today, and the parrot expired. So he had a mahogany casket built for the parrot. He had a red coaster wagon that got out of his hardware store. He took that over to the funeral home. He had 2 boys to pull the wagon and 4 girls to go behind the wagon as mourners. And they pulled that wagon out to the cemetery and buried it on Sam's lot. Now, today you can go out there and there's a piece of marble about that big square, and we raised it up out of the ground so people could know right where it was. And it's got inscribed on that piece of marble across the diagonal. And that's the story of the parrot.
Well, you've heard him talk about the Centennial in Fredericktown, and this picture was taken at that time for the oldest businessmen in Fredericktown. One of them is J.F. Jones, Fred Hosey, Melvin Beck, and Charles Fink, and I think it's a very good picture. It was all taken for the oldest businessmen in Fredericktown. Most of the people here are familiar with Sunglow Industries, and I have did some research on it to get an idea, or give everybody an idea how it started. So to start with, there was a man by the name of F.B. Zaid, Frank Zaid, who was born in Marion County, and later they moved to Marion, Ohio. This is about 1900 or 1902. And Frank was a young man and graduated from school. He was working with his brother, and he didn't seem to think he was making too much progress because his brother was not, as he said, too aggressive. So Frank got on his bicycle, this is about 1902, and rode this bicycle to Akron, which was about 75 miles. And in doing so, he passed through Fredericktown, and on his way back, he found out that there was a sawmill for sale, and he bought the sawmill in Fredericktown. Well, this is pictures taken from the water tower, and this is northeast of Fredericktown, out what they call Tatertown. The reason I'm showing these pictures is because Zig Manufacturing started out in this area right here. This is Zig Manufacturing, and this was started in about 1900 or 1902 or 3. Zig Manufacturing, and if you recognize some of those buildings, they were later used by Greg Manufacturing. Here's another picture. In this particular building here, FB Zig manufactured road graders and harness hooks and culvert pipe, manufactured culvert pipe that bolted together for culverts and many other iron-related products. So he had a foundry here and a sawmill. Later on, he purchased another sawmill for about $2,000, and this was located over on Mill Street. Many of you here remember Mill, where the sawmill was. In the early days, the logs were brought in by wagons. Later on, they were brought in by tractors, and many of the Eddie Toms related about people driving the tractors, how they drove the tractors around Fredericktown. This is some of the logs that were used in the manufacture of his lumber. Over where the body shop is now, there was a place called the Licking Creamery. And the reason I brought this picture along to show was I want to relate something in relation to this creamery, which is where the body shop is over there right now. Frank Zig, in about 1913, the molding room in the foundry had burnt down out here. Jim Foote owned it, and he wanted to sell the foundry to molding room to F.E. Zig. F.E. Zig said he didn't have the money, but he got together with Ralph Struble. Ralph Struble and F.E. Zig bought out the foundry, and it was J.B. Foote Foundry. This was about 1915. This has progressed to such a point that he was going to expand, so he bought more land down along where it is now Sunglow Factory Building. But before that, he was, well, after he went into business down there, he was making playground equipment. First he made washing machines, wooden washing machines, and he sold at Sears and Roebuck, and many other wooden items relating to wood products. And one of the more interesting things of, if many of you remember around Fredericktown, he built a dam over behind the sawmill and built a swimming pool there. This is one of the first things, and I won't tell a story about Bob Sargent being up on top of it one time, but this is the bathing houses, the ladies and the men's bathing houses there. These are all pictures of the swimming facilities in Fredericktown, which today many people don't know exist. This was around 1920s.
John?
Yes.
Oh, Casey Cagewood and Clyde Hawkins and Hamsball. They were the
lifeguards.
Yes, there. Mr. Zig had them.
So this is one of the first buildings that was built down here where the present Sunglow building is. This was the office building that he used. And later on they went into manufacturing of furniture. I had a paper here. FB Zig Manufacturing was in business, that is down here in the present, what we call the Sunglow building, 1915 to 1929. And Sunglow bought this out. Do you have a picture with you, Norman?
No, I gave it to Jake. He's got it.
Sunglow Industries bought the building from Zig in 1929, and they operated until 1953. Then there was an outfit by the name of Bucksbaum bought the building. They operated in 1953, 1959. Now the worldwide investment companies own the building, which stands vacant down along the tracks. But F.B. Zig later went to Columbus, and he and his son went in the real estate business. This is one of their first ventures in Columbus there. That's the Neal Apartments. And Harold Zig eventually was one of the biggest benefactors to our local historical society and the library. And so F.B. Zig was recognized as one of the leading industrial men of Fredericktown for many, many years.
Did Mr. Zig have a very famous son-in-law?
Yes, he does have a very famous son-in-law. George Steinbrenner is his son-in-law.
Mr. Steinbrenner, the owner of the New York Yankees.
That's right, yeah. He's advertising Kentucky Fried Chicken now. And I think he probably needs some money.
John, can you tell us anything about the water tower that stood in the square?
Well, that was before my time, but Wendell maybe knows. Do you know when the water tower stood in the fair?
In the square.
Yeah.
And it was built about 1906. And 1916 they tore it down, put the tower over where it is now. It was close to source of water.
And where's the tower now?
They sold it to Centerburg. Centerburg bought the thing, put it back up, and it worked over there until, I think, 2 years ago. They tore that down and built a new one. I was going through one of the minutes, and that's the water board thing, and they paid $20,000 for it.
Can anyone tell us about the Indian mounds around Fredericktown?
The two, one down by the water, and one up on the hill. Two of them.
Yeah, South Main Street and Mountain Street, I believe.
That's right. There, and one down by the bridge, going back to the water.
Past the sewer disposal.
Yes.
Well, isn't one of those Indian mounds goes from the bridge down to the disposal plant, goes south down to Jewel Bridge. It was in a mound type, it's still there. See, on the left side of the bridge, up on the hill was the other mound.
Tell us a little bit about the fire system. What do you know about those?
Well, in the heyday of the fire department, they had a pumper that had long rod on each side, and got 4 guys on that thing, and they pump up and down like that. They put the sucker in this cistern, and it was about, I don't know how many gallons that would hold. It was anywhere from 6 to 10 feet down and about 6 feet around. And the only one I ever knew about was right up there on Chestnut Street in Sandusky. So we put a plaque on that. And later on, I found out that there was another one in town. That's up on Holly Street, in front of Lodi Reed's home.
There was one on First Street too.
Yeah, there was one further.
Used part of that cistern to put a fuel oil tank in there for our engine.
There was one up in front of the Baptist Church. The church fell in and they revamped it to tore the thing down.
Does anyone else have anything interesting they'd like to share?
I have another picture here, and I would like to see if we couldn't relate a little more about the businesses in Fredericktown or the manufacturing in Fredericktown. But here's one for L.H. Brenninger Cement Products. And the reason I brought this along was because the property down here at the corner of Mulberry and Taylor Street, which is this block building right here, was fabricated with cement blocks right on the location. Brenninger made the blocks, laid them, and made this home. And it was, I don't know what originally Wagner home or not, but people named Smith lived down there now. I do think probably in this particular segment, we should have something about Gregg Manufacturing, because the Greggs were instrumental in quite a lot of farm products, which later became lamps. And of course the Edward Sheet Metal that's been in Fredericktown for a number of years. And many of you talked about the laboring produce in our previous meetings about Homer Lavering, Harold Lavering, and their activities. And many other Hicks Gate Company was located up here in the north end where I guess it's on Mulberry Street too. And it was just a very industrial town. And Wendell procured a bell from called Rankin Bell, and you want to tell them about the Rankin Bell company, Wendell?
Well, history says that there's a bell factory up in the square where Fred Bowling's funeral home was. There's two brothers, an LB and an SR or something like that. Anyway, they're buried out here at Ford Cemetery. And they made bells ahead of G.B. Foote. And my son-in-law and Elaine were down in Adams County one day and looking, I don't know, antiques of some kind. They come across this little store, and the guy had a bell there. It says, S.R. Rankin, Fredericktown, Ohio. So they bought it sight unseen, brought it up. We're trying to get Updike to make a frame for the thing. All I got's the bell. It doesn't have a clapper in it, but and there's just a square piece on the top about that high with a hole in it. I suppose that was where this thing fastened into the tip of it or whatever. But we got it. And then Eve would give us one of the first found pumps around here. We got it mounted up at the museum, the steps. So we gathered up some choice items. It so happens that I'm the only living guy that was on the building committee when the church fell in. The guy was digging the trench at the back.
Which church was it?
Baptist. And the foundation was about 3 foot by 1 foot square of sandstone, but it never had any base under it. They just set it on the ground, built the church on that. But when these guys were in the back, going to build a foundation for an educational building, they got too close. The thing just caved in. The way it went the whole back end. There was a piano sitting, well, right beside the wall. That wall went right straight down, never hit the piano at all. So we didn't know what to do. Tried to sue the contractor, and he didn't have any insurance. So we decided to build new one.
What year was it?
59, I believe. 58 it fell in, 59 we started the new church. And we got an architect, Marion, brought up the plan construction over Italian was the contractor. And it took about 2 years to get the thing back in shape again. We went to the congregation and asked them where they thought they would like to see the church. We were going to build a new one. We'll build it up there where the old one was, or do we go out here somewhere and get some land and build it out there? So everybody voted to put it where the old one was, because it was handy for older people to walk to church.
One time, wasn't there 3 churches up on the square?
Oh, yeah. Methodist, Presbyterian, Baptist.
And what is the Methodist church now up there?
Oh, that's a museum. See, when they built the Methodists built the thing out here, there was the church, and also before that it was the library, and when they moved out, the thing was vacant.
The Brookside Restaurant was done for my mother and Diane, and their first one was the room down on the to go to the depot. It was a room, and so they done it, and they done it to the first room above them, the next on the main street. And it was a restaurant in the Odd Fellow building. And so
That was on the lower level, wasn't it?
huh?
Was that on the lower
This,
level?
no, this was on Main Street,
The main street.
but the other one was down over the hill.
There's the newspaper office was down there too.
Yes, yes. So Billy Owens, he's the customer in this here. He was auctioneer.
Can anyone tell us about the old railroad depot down on Mill Street? When it was there and when it left?
Yeah. What do I know about it?
Just some history, you know, Wendell.
All right. The guy that bought it, well, I'll backtrack a little. Will Grant got to dickering with, and he bought the thing for $7,000.
Now, was this after the railroad went out of business?
Yeah.
And he was gonna move it out to where his harness shop is on Salem and make a shop out of it.
And about what year was that?
Let's see, it was in the 60s or so. Anyway, the guy that tore it down was gonna build it, make a house, so he carefully took the thing apart and all the curlicues under the roof. He carefully preserved those, and the windows on the little thing that stuck out. So he took it up to Worcester, and he and his wife had a fallout. He left her and went to Oregon and worked in a lumberyard for a while. And he came back, and he didn't want this thing behind his barn. It was 3 piles of lumber, because he carefully took the thing apart, thinking he'd be using it. So he finally decided he'd sell the darn thing, put it on in the plain dealer, and Jerry McKenna, who was down on 36 where the new old depot is now, and he was in the antique business and working for a plumber up in North Fredericktown. So he advertised in plain dealer for a depot. So Jerry went up to see it, and he says, "Guy, you got a depot for sale?" "Yeah." "Where is it?" "Back of the barn." So he goes back there, and here's 3 piles of lumber. Jerry said, "I didn't know what to do about it." So he tried to stall him off a little bit. Jerry come up here and he talked to Norman and Frederick and me and anybody else he could dredge up to see if we had any pictures of that thing on each side, because he was, at that time, he was contemplating buying the thing and restoring it down on 36 for his antique shop. So we scrounged and begged and borrowed and everything, and we got him enough pictures so he could see what the thing looked like, something down there. So he bought it, took it down on 36, put it together. Of course, it looks better down there now than it ever did down here.
Was the other depot taken down before the one on the left going down the hill?
Well,
the one behind,
depot was on the right
behind
side,
our property.
going down there, and it was in Broomback's elevator. And he had a ramp, and he let the ramp down. See, there was 2 tracks there. There was a side track and the main track. So he let a ramp down, and so they could walk over the one track and get over to the other one. And he sold everything. Then it was about 1915, the thing caught fire and blew up. Then they put in built the other one there.
Well, again, I like to thank.
Fredericktown was quite a railroad center, I would say, because we had a passenger train that run from Chicago into somewhere at nighttime and one back in the morning.
Really?
And then about every Sunday or various Sundays, there'd be an excursion run to Cedar Point, and you'd take your family down. Whenever you'd hear the train coming in, you'd take your family down and watch the people get off the train that came in from Cedar Point, or vice versa. You'd get down there in the morning and watch them. That was some of the entertainment we had in Fredericktown. And I don't know what Bob quoted any price or not, but one of the most famous things around was that when the Bells, Lost Bell and his wife ran a hotel down here, you could get a chicken dinner for 35 cents, the best chicken dinner in Knox County for 35 cents.
Yeah.
Plate lunch at Chippecassi's for a quarter.
Yeah.
My brother and I, we went down to the depot every day at 6 o'clock to get the newspapers and hit Fredericktown.
I guess we long for the good old days, and from what everyone has said this evening, they were really good old days.